David, why guitar of all the instruments in the world?
It's easier than piano.
Pink Floyd is remembered as a legendary band, but their real story is far stranger than most people realize. It begins with a fragile genius who left too soon. It evolves into a group that reinvented itself again and again. It explodes into worldwide fame. It pushes spectacle beyond anything rock had seen before, and it leaves behind messages most listeners never noticed. This is one continuous journey, from origin to identity to legacy. Welcome to the hidden story of Pink Floyd.
Just might work out that you get more sort of basic freedom.
What if Syd Barrett never left Pink Floyd? Not in the sense of being cured or fixed or somehow made easier to manage, but simply in the most human way possible. What if he had remained part of the room where the music was being made? Because when you listen closely to Pink Floyd after 1968, it's hard not to hear his absence as much as their presence. The band's greatest work often feels like it's circling something that can no longer be touched, as if the music itself is aware that someone important is missing. So tonight, instead of retelling the story we already know, let's sit with the question that has followed Pink Floyd for more than 50 years. What if Syd Barrett never left the band? In the beginning, Syd Barrett wasn't just a member of Pink Floyd. He was the point around which everything else revolved. The sound, the attitude, even the idea that a band could be strange without apology all came naturally to him. Roger Waters would later look back on those early days and say, Syd was the guiding light of the early band. That single sentence explains more than pages of analysis ever could. Nick Mason, writing with the clarity of hindsight, was even more direct. Syd was the creative force. He was the one who wrote the songs. That wasn't a romantic memory, it was a statement of fact. Rick Wright, who rarely spoke in dramatic terms, reduced it even further when he said, Syd was our inspiration. When someone like Wright chooses words that carefully, you understand that what was lost wasn't just material, but a way of thinking that couldn't be replaced. What happened to Syd didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a single collapse or a dramatic moment where everything suddenly went wrong. It was a slow unraveling that took place in full view of an industry that had no reason to slow down. By late 1967, Pink Floyd were being pushed forward by their own success. There were tours to complete, television appearances to make, and expectations to meet, all of it arriving at once. Syd, already fragile and inward-looking, was being asked to function in a world that rewarded constant output and punished hesitation. Years later, Nick Mason would admit, we didn't realize at the time how fragile he really was. That admission matters because it suggests that what happened wasn't indifference or cruelty, but misunderstanding. David Gilmour, who had known Syd before fame complicated everything, later put it more bluntly. He wasn't mad in the way people like to say. He was damaged by the situation he was put in. When you hear it phrased like that, the story stops feeling inevitable and starts feeling avoidable. Once you accept that idea, the question becomes difficult to ignore. If the situation damaged Syd, then what might have happened if the situation had changed instead? Imagine a moment where the touring stops, where the pressure eases, and where success is allowed to wait. There is nothing miraculous about this scenario. It simply involves time, space, and the absence of constant demands. History gives us reason to think this mattered. When Syd was removed from expectation and left to work alone, he could still write, still record, still create music that carried his unmistakable voice. The problem was never the lack of imagination, but the environment in which it was expected to perform on command. In this alternate path, Pink Floyd chooses patience. David Gilmour still joins the band, but not as a replacement. He becomes a stabilizing presence. someone who can translate Sid's ideas into a structure that the rest of the group can hold on to. The band begins to function differently. No single person dominates, and no single vision overwhelms the others. Nick Mason once reflected that Sid's greatest contribution wasn't only his songs, but the freedom he introduced, the sense that the band could follow ideas wherever they led without needing to explain themselves. Eventually, this version of Pink Floyd reaches the moment where they begin working on the dark side of the moon. In our reality, the album reflects anxieties about time, pressure, and mental strain, themes that grew out of watching people fracture under expectation. But imagine writing that album while the person who inspired those themes was still present, still contributing, still quietly listening from the corner of the room. Sid wouldn't need to take control of the record to change it. His presence alone would alter its weight. Small ideas, unfinished fragments, and slightly unstable textures would introduce a different kind of honesty, one that doesn't observe mental fragility from a distance but lives beside it. In that context, a song like Brain Damage becomes less of a reflection and more of a conversation, and the album's power comes not from detachment, but from proximity. There is, however, an unavoidable consequence to saving Sid. If he never leaves, Wish You Were Here cannot exist in the form we know. That album is shaped by absence, by grief, and by the strange experience of missing someone who is still alive. Rick Wright once reflected on the years after Sid left and said, "After Sid left, we had to find another way of working. Nothing ever came as easily again." That difficulty, painful as it was, became the emotional gravity that defined Pink Floyd's most resonant work. Without that loss, the music continues, but it turns outward rather than inward. There is more exploration and less mourning, more curiosity and less reflection. The band remains inventive, but the emotional center shifts in a way that is impossible to measure. From here, the story can only end in one of two ways. In one version, Sid stabilizes over time, the band remains balanced, and Pink Floyd continues as a collective longer than anyone might have expected. In the other, too many ideas begin to pull in different directions, and the group fractures earlier, not from anger, but from creative overload. David Gilmour once said, "Sid was a genius." That word gets thrown around a lot, but he really was. Genius expands what's possible, but it also introduces fragility when it isn't carefully supported. So what if Syd Barrett never left Pink Floyd? Perhaps the music becomes gentler, or perhaps it becomes stranger. Perhaps the greatest albums are never written, or perhaps they are replaced by others we can no longer imagine. What we do know is that in the world we live in, Sid's absence became part of the band's identity. The space he left behind shaped the music as much as any sound that was ever recorded. And it's possible that Pink Floyd didn't just lose Syd Barrett. It's possible they were defined by the space where he used to be.
It was never meant to last, and you could not imagine Syd Barrett making another 3 or 4 albums with Pink Floyd. You could not imagine, to saying this as a fan looking from the outside, it's impossible to imagine him having a 40-odd year career in the way that David Gilmour and Roger Waters have had, playing Live 8, touring and playing stadiums. That's not what Syd Barrett was all about. And to many of the people that knew him, and people have spoken about this, is, he wasn't meant for this world, if you like. He was an artist, and he was an artist who was dabbling in pop music. He gave up his studies as an artist to go away and become a pop star. And like many, many people since, it didn't suit him.
Pink Floyd was never just one band. It changed personality, sound, and purpose again and again. From fragile experimentation, to precision and control, to theatrical spectacle, to cold emotional distance. 4 eras, 4 identities, 1 name. This is how Pink Floyd kept reinventing itself, without losing its soul.
Pink Floyd had 4 completely different bands hiding in plain sight.
Most fans think they know the story, but what if I told you the Pink Floyd that created Dark Side of the Moon was totally different from the one that made The Wall? And the original Pink Floyd? They would barely recognize what came after. In the next few minutes, we are revealing the four opposing identities of the world's most mysterious band, and the shocking truth about which version was the real Pink Floyd. Meet the Underground Experimenters, 1965 to 1968. Version 1 will blow your mind because this Pink Floyd was led by a genius who painted his fingernails and once showed up to a gig with a jar of Brill cream in his hair, playing slide guitar with it. Syd Barrett wasn't just Pink Floyd's leader, he was Pink Floyd.
Well, I wouldn't have existed if it hadn't been for Syd.
Picture this. Cambridge art students creating sounds that literally didn't exist before. Barrett would tune his guitar between songs, use echo chambers like instruments, and write lyrics that sounded like Alice in Wonderland on acid.
We would have been one of those thousands and thousands of bands who come up and they play blues and Louie Louie, and they might write the odd crappy song and then they disappear, and they get proper jobs, and that's the end of it.
Their first album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, was recorded in the same studio as the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's. But while the Beatles were perfecting pop, Pink Floyd was inventing space rock. Barrett's guitar work on Interstellar Overdrive used techniques that wouldn't become mainstream for another decade. But here's the tragic twist. Barrett's mind was fragmenting as fast as his music was evolving. By 1968, he'd become so unpredictable that the band hired David Gilmour just to cover for him when Barrett couldn't perform. Barrett's departure nearly killed Pink Floyd, but what happened next saved them and changed rock history forever. The Identity Seekers, 1968 to 1970. Version 2 was Pink Floyd's most dangerous period. They almost became a completely different band. With Barrett gone, Pink Floyd faced an existential crisis. David Gilmour joined. But nobody knew what Pink Floyd was supposed to sound like without their creative genius. They were four musicians pretending to be a band that no longer existed. This era produced their most experimental work. A saucerful of secrets and umaguma were Pink Floyd trying on different musical personalities like clothes. Roger Waters started writing more, but his concepts were still forming. Wright's keyboards became more atmospheric. Mason's drums got more complex. Here's what most fans miss. This wasn't Pink Floyd finding their sound. This was Pink Floyd creating their sound from scratch. Every weird experiment, every failed concept, every 20-minute instrumental was them building the foundation for what came next. But the real magic happened when they stopped trying to replace Barrett and started becoming something entirely new. And that brings us to the Pink Floyd that conquered the world. The Perfectionists, 1970 to 1979. Version 3 created the most successful album in rock history, and they almost broke up making it. This is the Pink Floyd you know. Waters' concepts, Gilmour's guitar mastery, Wright's atmospheric keyboards, Mason's rhythmic precision, four musicians operating as one creative mind. Metal through The Wall, 9 years of pure genius. But here's the secret. They weren't just making albums, they were creating experiences. Dark Side of the Moon wasn't recorded, it was constructed. Every heartbeat, every cash register ring, every spoken word was precisely placed. And about that biggest hit question, it wasn't Another Brick in the Wall or Comfortably Numb. Their biggest commercial success was Money from Dark Side, but their most important song was Shine on You, Crazy Diamond, their tribute to Barrett that proved they never forgot where they came from. But success bred conflict. By The Wall, Waters was essentially dictating every note. He'd become what Barrett never was, a musical dictator. The other members were session musicians in their own band.
This tension exploded in the most dramatic band breakup in rock history. But here's the twist. It wasn't the end. It was transformation number 4. The Survivors, 1985 to 2014. Version 4 proved that Pink Floyd was bigger than any single member, even their main songwriter. When Roger Waters left in 1985, he made a bold claim. Pink Floyd is finished. He was spectacularly wrong. David Gilmour took control and proved something revolutionary. Pink Floyd wasn't Waters' vision brought to life by talented musicians. Pink Floyd was the sound created when these specific people played together. Waters had the concepts, but Gilmour had the soul. A momentary lapse of reason and The Division Bell showed a different Pink Floyd, less conceptual, more emotional. Gilmour's guitar became the storyteller. Wright's keyboards, freed from Waters' rigid structures, soared again. They weren't trying to recreate The Wall. They were discovering what Pink Floyd sounded like when it breathed freely. The proof? Their 1994 Division Bell tour was the highest-grossing rock tour in history at that time. Fans didn't come for nostalgia. They came because this version of Pink Floyd was still creating magic. And then came 2005. Live 8. One night only. All 4 surviving members on stage together for the first time in 24 years. 20 minutes that reminded the world why Pink Floyd was never just about any single member. But here's the ultimate question. Which version was the real Pink Floyd? The answer might surprise you. Here's the truth that took me years to understand. There was no real Pink Floyd. Each version was completely authentic to its moment. Barrett's chaos created the foundation. The transition period built the tools. The golden era perfected the craft. The survivors proved the legacy. Pink Floyd wasn't one band that changed. It was 4 different bands that happened to share a name. And that's exactly why they're immortal. They didn't just evolve, they reinvented the very concept of what a band could be. Which Pink Floyd speaks to your soul? Barrett's psychedelic chaos? Waters' conceptual perfection? Or Gilmour's emotional mastery? Drop your choice in the comments. I read every single one. And if this deep dive revealed something new about the band you thought you knew completely, smash that subscribe button.
Reinvention gave Pink Floyd direction, but one moment changed everything. A simple idea, a classroom of children, a song that crossed every border. Overnight, they were no longer a cult band. They were a global phenomenon. This is the unlikely story of how Pink Floyd became a mainstream force.
A song blasting out of every radio in 1980, topping charts in 14 countries, turning into the ultimate anti-authority anthem. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural phenomenon, a rallying cry for a generation. You know the chant, right? We don't need no education, sung by a choir of kids who sound like they've just busted out of detention, utterly defiant and perfectly pitched. This track, Another Brick in the Wall, wasn't just big. It was a 40 million selling smash, platinum on 3 continents, inescapable. Yet the actual voices on that iconic hook, 23 13-year-olds who never saw a penny for a quarter of a century. Imagine that. Then, against all odds, a stubborn royalties sleuth enters the picture. A law changes, and the grown-up kids finally get to ask, "Where's our money?" Stick around. This is how a spontaneous classroom sing-along became one of rock's biggest injustices, and how a tiny clause in a 1996 statute rewrote the ending, proving that even after decades, justice can sometimes find its way home. It's the autumn term, 1979. Islington Green School, nestled in North London. Suddenly, the quiet routine of lessons is broken when music teacher Alun Renshaw gets an unexpected call, a whisper from the rock and roll gods themselves. Pink Floyd need a children's choir for their ambitious new concept album, The Wall. Renshaw, a man clearly with a bit of rebel spirit himself, keeps it hush-hush from the head teacher. Can you imagine the thrill? He marches 23 unsuspecting kids, aged between 13 and 14, across the road to Britannia Row Studios during lesson time, a secret mission unfolding right under the nose of school authority. They're handed lyrics that talk about dark sarcasm in the classroom and thought control, words that might have raised an eyebrow or two if the head had caught wind. The kids, being kids, giggle at the naughty bits, then belt out the chorus with a raw, unpolished energy in just a couple of takes. Job done. They're back before the lunch bell, buzzing with an unforgettable secret. There were no contracts in sight, absolutely no talk of money, just the sheer, unadulterated thrill of singing on a real record. Weeks later, the single rockets to #1 in the UK, then #1 in the US, and frankly, everywhere else too. The school receives a modest £1,000 and a shiny platinum disc for its troubles. The kids? They get commemorative flexi discs and bragging rights. And honestly, when you're 13, that feels like more than enough. Who needs money when you've got playground glory? Life, as it always does, moves on. The pupils eventually leave school, grow up, and carve out their own paths. They hit their 20s, then their 30s, becoming nurses, cabbies, social workers, IT techs. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives. But there's one extraordinary constant. Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, never, ever leaves the airwaves. Pubs, stadiums, movie soundtracks blast it constantly, a ubiquitous anthem of rebellion. Every single play, every spin on the radio or TV is supposed to generate a royalty. That's how the music business works, right? Except these session singers, hired without paperwork back in 1979, were basically ghosts in the system. The money pipeline, a complex network of labels, publishers and performance rights organizations, flowed freely to the band, the record label, the publisher. The choir? Completely locked out. One former pupil, now a dinner lady, tells a local paper she hums along in the school canteen, and kids sometimes ask, "Miss, isn't that you?" She just shrugs, a wry smile on her face. She can't exactly invoice anyone. It's a surreal existence, hearing your own voice, your youthful defiance, echo through public spaces, knowing it fuels a multi-million-pound industry, yet you remain utterly uncompensated. The song becomes a rebel flag for millions, yet the very people who gave it that rebellious voice can't even pay a parking ticket with their share of its immense success. And so, 25 years glide past, a quarter century of their voices ringing out, unheard in the financial sense. Then, a subtle shift in the legal landscape. December 1996, the UK transposes an EU directive into what becomes the copyright and related rights regulations. It's dense, it's full of legalese, but buried deep within its clauses is a game changer. Performers now own a right to equitable remuneration whenever their recorded work is broadcast. What does that actually mean in plain English? It translates to this. If your voice is identifiable on a track, and that track gets played on radio or TV, you can claim a slice of the broadcast royalties. And here's the crucial bit. You can claim it, even if you signed away everything else in some long-forgotten contract, which these kids didn't even have. There's a catch, of course. The rule isn't retroactive to sales, nor does it cover airplay before 1997. Still, It's a foot in the door, a glimmer of hope for anyone who slipped through the cracks pre-1996. Word of this new legislation spreads slowly, quietly, through musicians' unions, like a ripple in a vast ocean. Enter Peter Rowan. It's 2004, and Rowan, a softly spoken but tenacious royalties investigator, makes a living sniffing out unpaid performance cash. He's meticulously combing through PAMRA, Performing Artists Media Rights Association, logs, a sea of data. He spots repeated plays of Another Brick in the Wall, cross-references the performers list, and finds it blank. A bell rings in his head. How could the voices on one of the biggest hits ever be uncredited? He tracks down Alan Renshaw, the very teacher who led the choir, now teaching in Australia, who, remarkably, still has a dusty class register from 1979. With that golden list in hand, Rowan embarks on a painstaking mission. He cold calls ex-pupils, explains this obscure new law, and slowly, carefully, forms a loose committee of the 23rd. It's a monumental task, reconnecting people whose paths diverged decades ago, all united by a song they sang as children. Paperwork is filed, and a new chapter begins. The industry reaction. Well, let's just say there were a lot of sympathetic smiles and pats on the back, but not much genuine expectation of a significant payout. The common line, often delivered with a dismissive wave of the hand, was, "Kids from a school choir, they'll get peanuts." It was an easy way to brush off what seemed like a minor claim. But Rowan, ever the advocate, countered sharply, "Peanuts are still peanuts they're owed." He argued forcefully that the choir was unmistakably featured. These weren't just anonymous background singers. These were named minors in a distinct union of voices, their contribution integral and identifiable, not some faceless crowd. The newly created PPL, Phonographic Performance Limited, the organization responsible for collecting UK broadcast fees, became the target of Rowan's group claim, citing that crucial equitable remuneration right under the 96 regulations. The negotiations dragged on for months, a slow grind against established norms and industry skepticism. Pink Floyd's management, though aware, stayed politely on the sidelines. After all, they don't hold the performers' share of broadcast royalties. The school, now an academy trust, couldn't stake a claim either, because the law specifically recognizes individual performers, not institutions. It was a battle for individual recognition. Finally, in 2005, after much deliberation and legal wrangling, PPL approved back payments for airplay stretching from 1997 to that date. Each singer was officially credited on the database as Islington Green School Choir, uncredited vocal. It felt less like a grand victory and more like a typo being corrected 26 years late, a bureaucratic acknowledgement of a long-ignored truth. But it was official, and for the first time, their voices were not just heard, but accounted for. So, what was the grand payday for a quarter-century of uncredited vocal brilliance? Around £130 per person for 8 years of radio spins. Future statements trickled in at maybe £12 a year, coffee and cake money, as some wryly called it. Not remotely life-changing. Certainly not the rock star riches one might imagine for a #1 hit. Yet, when those first envelopes landed on doorsteps, something profound happened. There were tears, group WhatsApp voice notes buzzing with excitement, and an impromptu pub reunion in Angel, North London, where old friends reconnected over a shared, improbable history. One woman used her cheque for a weekend in Barcelona, a little escape she couldn't quite justify before. Another topped up her daughter's university textbook fund, a small but meaningful contribution to a new generation's education. They toasted Renshaw via Zoom, their old teacher in Australia, who joked that the £1,000 the school took all those years ago looked mighty small now. Newspapers ran heartwarming "Pink Floyd Kids Finally Paid" headlines, and music magazines hailed it as a moral victory. Because really, for these individuals, it wasn't about the sum, it was about acknowledgement. The charts had logged a hit, history had logged a choir, and finally, after decades, the accounting logs matched the reality. Their contribution, once invisible, was now undeniably, officially, recorded. Fast forward to today, streaming platforms often list feat. Islington Green School Choir on deluxe remasters of The Wall. Royalties investigators cite the case in lectures, a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. Musicians now routinely demand performer IDs and clear contractual terms before even stepping into a studio. Labels might grumble about the extra paperwork and the perceived hassle, but the principle is set, solidified by stories like this. If you can be heard, you can and should be paid. However, the fight isn't over. The same loopholes or new ones persist elsewhere. We still have ghost singers, ghost players, and now, with advancing technology, the unsettling prospect of AI stand-ins whose contributions might go uncredited and uncompensated. The Islington Kids win reminds artists, both established and emerging, to read the fine print, to lobby tirelessly for retroactive fixes to existing injustices, and to keep tabs on every legal tweak and technological shift. Were the sums small? Absolutely. But justice scaled to size, especially when it's been denied for so long, still tastes incredibly sweet. It's a testament to the idea that even the smallest voices, when united and persistent, can make the biggest institutions listen. If stories like this make you rethink the songs you grew up with, the hidden histories behind the anthems of our lives, then you absolutely need to hit that subscribe button. I've got a queue of hidden voices and untold tales waiting for their curtain call, and YouTube's algorithm only shows you the next one if it sees that subscribe button lit. And hey, drop a comment. Any other tracks you've always wondered, who actually sang that? Maybe we'll dig into its secrets next. So the next time you hear that rebellious chant, that iconic call for freedom from oppression, remember this. Behind the stadium-filling wall of sound are 23 kids who once whispered in assembly, who secretly giggled at forbidden lyrics. They gave Pink Floyd its biggest hit, carried the anthem of a generation, and for decades walked away with nothing but playground glory and the memory of a thrilling afternoon. 25 years, one quiet statute change, and one stubborn investigator later, they finally opened an envelope containing the world's smallest apology, and undeniable proof that even late, even against massive odds, the system can budge. This wasn't about rock and roll excess or chasing fame, it was about everyday fairness finally cashed in. And that, more than the money, is what they'd been singing for all along.
Success gave Pink Floyd power, and they used it to build the impossible. Massive stages, towering lights, a flying pig over the city skyline. But one show went too far, too big, too uncontrolled. The result? Shut down an international airport. This is the day Pink Floyd turned spectacle into chaos.
On December 2nd, 1976, London's skies were disrupted by one of the strangest incidents in rock history. A 40-foot inflatable pig, built for a Pink Floyd album cover, broke free from its moorings above Battersea Power Station.
This is the actual spot where we flew the pig for the first time between the two chimneys.
The balloon drifted into restricted airspace, forced Heathrow Airport to delay flights, and triggered a police search that stretched across the city.
Everyone was beginning sort of to be partly amused, but partly thinking we might be caught up in one of the worst aviation disasters in the history of the planet.
Hours later, the pig came down in Kent, more than 30 miles away.
At 9 o'clock in the evening, I received a call from a farmer in Kent. He said, "Are you looking for a pink pig?" Well, it's in my field frightening my cows.
What should have been a single photograph for an album sleeve became an aviation incident reported in newspapers across Britain. By late 1976, Pink Floyd were preparing to release their 10th studio album. Animals was a bleak commentary on modern society, inspired by George Orwell's Animal Farm, dividing humanity into dogs, pigs, and sheep.
It's moving away a little bit from the soundscapes that we did on the Wish You Were Here album into something that is a little more in your face and a little more rough and ready and more aggressive. The lyrics are a lot more aggressive.
The music was already recorded at Britannia Row Studios in Islington.
The big thing was the development of Britannia Row, our own recording studio. And this was a fairly major departure for us.
And the band turned to Hypnosis, their trusted design team, for the visual concept. Storm Thorgerson and Aubrey Poe Powell wanted something powerful, monumental, and unmistakably industrial. They settled on Battersea Power Station, an Art Deco colossus on the south bank of the Thames.
But it's also the fact that it's a power station, so it's like, and that it's upside down, and also that there are 4 chimneys, you know, and there are 4 phalluses, and there were 4 people in the band. But then the idea of creating the event of a big inflatable pig flying over Battersea Power Station.
Battersea was no ordinary building. Constructed in 2 stages between 1929 and 1955, its twin stations, A and B, produced more than 500 megawatts at full capacity. In the 1950s, it supplied roughly a fifth of London's electricity. With 4 white chimneys rising 103 meters high, it was one of the most recognizable landmarks on the city's skyline. The building's sheer bulk, brickwork, and smokestacks represented the industrial machine, the perfect backdrop for an album about dehumanization and power. The cover required something more than just architecture. Roger Waters suggested a pig, the album's central symbol of corruption and greed, floating between the chimneys.
Okay, we're starting off with the idea of an inflatable pig. What else? Well, other inflatables. Well, let's make a nuclear family, and 2.5 children, or whatever. And
to make this real, Hypnosis contracted Ballon Fabrique, a German company that had been building airships and giant inflatables since the early 20th century. The pig was nicknamed Algy. It measured around 40 feet long, 12 meters from snout to tail, and stood nearly 30 feet high when inflated. It was fabricated from heavy-duty canvas coated in polyurethane, designed to hold helium for hours at a time. Steel cables were attached to anchor points on the ground. The first attempt to photograph the pig was scheduled for December 1st, 1976. The production team arrived early at Battersea and began inflating the balloon. To guard against disaster, Powell had hired a licensed marksman armed with a rifle. His task was to shoot a hole in the pig if it broke free. But the weather refused to cooperate. London was blanketed in thick cloud and fog, with visibility reduced to a few hundred meters. The pig rose between the chimneys, but the helicopter could not capture a clear shot. After hours of waiting, the session was abandoned. The pig was deflated and stored overnight. The following day, December 2nd, conditions improved slightly, though winds were stronger. The team re-inflated Algy and prepared for a second attempt.
The Orwellian idea of Animal Farm and of people characterized anthropomorphically as animals just seemed kind of neat.
Crucially, they had not rehired the marksman for this session, assuming the tethers would hold. Around midday, a sudden gust of wind pulled the pig violently upward. The steel rings securing the ropes failed. Witnesses on the ground saw the massive figure slip free and rise quickly into the sky. Within moments, the 40-foot pig was drifting eastward over London, completely uncontrolled. The timing could not have been worse. Heathrow Airport, located just west of London, was already Europe's busiest hub.
The pilot of the police helicopter certainly couldn't climb as fast as the pig could. I think the pig had a climb rate of over 2,000 feet a minute, and the helicopter couldn't stay with it.
In 1976, it handled 27.2 million passengers and more than 750 flights each day. As the balloon rose into airspace, pilots approaching Heathrow began reporting a large, unidentified object directly in their path. Controllers in the tower could not risk collisions. Departures were delayed and incoming aircraft were rerouted. For several hours, one of the world's busiest airports operated under disruption because of a flying pig. Police were alerted and helicopters were scrambled to track the balloon. But algae was already climbing high and drifting out of central London. Eyewitness reports describe the balloon floating over Essex before turning southeast. Some Londoners claimed to see a giant pink shape gliding silently above rooftops, while others thought it was an advertising stunt. In reality, it was completely unplanned, and Powell later recalled the panic when he realized the pig was gone. He received a phone call from authorities asking if he was the man looking for a pig. By late afternoon, after drifting more than 30 miles, algae began to lose altitude. Helium seeped out of the seams as the fabric cooled in the upper atmosphere. The balloon descended into farmland near Chilham in Kent. Local farmers reported livestock panicking as the massive pig touched down in their fields. Police secured the site, and the balloon was recovered with relatively little damage. It was transported back to London for repair. The following morning, December 3rd, newspapers ran headlines about the bizarre event, from the Times to local dailies. Radio shows joked about pigs flying over London. Despite the embarrassment, Powell was determined to finish the cover.
Animals is one of my favourite things because of the stories attached to it about the pig flying away. And everybody said, well, that must have been publicity stuff. But it wasn't. It was terrifying. Especially when you saw the thing. There's a photograph in the book where you see the pig going up and there's a jet airliner going across the Heathrow.
On December 3rd, a third session was organized at Battersea. This time, the pig was not flown. Instead, photographers captured the power station under clear skies. Later, the image of algae was composited into the frame in post-production. The final cover of Animals, released on January 21st, 1977, shows the pig suspended between the chimneys, but it is a product of darkroom manipulation rather than a single photograph. The incident generated enormous publicity. What should have been a routine photo session became national news. Instead of harming the band, the story amplified their reputation for grand, surreal gestures. The runaway pig became one of rock's most famous accidents. For the release of Animals, it ensured press coverage far beyond the usual music pages. The pig itself did not disappear after the cover. It became a recurring element in Pink Floyd's stage shows. During the 1977 In the Flesh tour, enormous pigs floated above stadium audiences, sometimes painted with political slogans or graffiti. In the Wall concerts of 1980 and 1981, the pig reappeared, hovering above the audience as part of the spectacle. Roger Waters adopted it into his solo performances, where the pig often carried modern political messages, from anti-war slogans to corporate logos. The 1976 escape was not the last. On April 27, 2008, during the Coachella Festival in California, another inflatable pig broke free during a Roger Waters performance. This version was even larger, around 40 feet tall and 30 feet wide, with slogans printed across its body. Overnight, the balloon drifted away, and the next day was found in 2 separate pieces in nearby neighborhoods. Just like in 1976, the story made international headlines. The pig had once again escaped its handlers, cementing its reputation as an unpredictable icon. Meanwhile, Battersea Power Station itself changed dramatically. Station A was shut down in 1975, just before the photo shoot. Station B closed in 1983. For decades, the site was abandoned, its 4 chimneys decaying and the brickwork crumbling. Numerous redevelopment plans failed until the 2010s, when a major restoration transformed the building into a complex of housing, offices, and retail. Yet for millions of people worldwide, Battersea remains associated first and foremost with Pink Floyd's Pig, an image that has outlasted the power station's working life. The facts of December 2nd, 1976 are simple. A 40-foot helium-filled pig, weighing hundreds of kilograms, built by a German balloon manufacturer, snapped free during a photo shoot at Battersea Power Station. Heathrow Airport, with 27 million passengers annually, delayed and rerouted flights. Police helicopters tracked the balloon as it drifted for more than 30 miles before landing in Kent. It was recovered largely intact and patched for reuse. The next day, newspapers reported the story nationwide. Weeks later, the album Animals was released with a cover that combined real photography and composited imagery. In hindsight, the accident became one of Pink Floyd's greatest publicity boosts. The band never planned for the pig to escape, and Aubrey Powell has admitted the failure was due to poor preparation on the second day. Yet the image of pigs flying over London captured public imagination. It turned an album launch into a cultural event. Today, the story stands as a reminder that accidents sometimes create legends. Pink Floyd set out to photograph a pig. Instead, they ended up grounding planes, alarming farmers, and writing an unforgettable page in the history of rock.
By the late 70s, Pink Floyd were everywhere. On radios, on television, on stadium stages around the world. But someone else was listening too. Not fans, not critics, but government agents. Files were opened, names were recorded, lyrics were analyzed. Somehow, a rock band became a subject of surveillance. This is the strange story of why the FBI watched Pink Floyd.
The FBI spied on John Lennon, and we also know that they have spied on Jimi Hendrix. But there are also rumors that they had a file on Pink Floyd, and they kept tabs on their performances because they thought there are subversive elements in their songs. Pink Floyd were not just a band that had hits, they had rebellion anthems that encaptured millions of people around the world. To the FBI, they were a threat. But if you look at their vault, which is publicly accessible database, and you search for any of these well-known cases of surveillance, you can find plenty of results. Here's, for example, for John Lennon. And if you open one of those files, you can see some very interesting things. The documents are heavily redacted, and there are plenty of parts which are blacked out, so you don't know what's underneath the pen, of course. But if you start reading some of these documents, they are just ridiculous. Look at this. It says, it is the latest album of John Lennon of the Beatles, and his latest flair, if I can read correctly, Yoko Ono. The cover of the album was a photograph of Lennon and Ono completely nude. And believe us, they don't hide a thing. It is now being sold to our young people on the record stands. Mr. Nelson, and Mr. Nelson is mentioned here above, I think as a congressman or something. It is the most discolored and vulgar display of garbage I have ever seen in my life. Isn't there some way we can get this album off the market? It has to be sent in the mail to the stores, which in turn sell it to the kids. It does have an envelope over the picture when bought in the stores, so it's also fraudulent advertising. You ask why the youth of today alike they are. This is one of the prime reasons. Another, I say to you, this has to stop. And I mean now. Poor John and misunderstood act. For FBI, which was the agency that was obsessed with threat from all sides, inside and outside, Pink Floyd was not just a regular rock band. They were a potential threat. If you look at the way FBI operated, especially in those years, Pink Floyd was a perfect target for them. So today we'll try to unravel some more details about this and find out what is a rumor, what is true. Main reason why there is a great possibility that such a file exists is the director of FBI at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, a person who was obsessed with threats. He was the director of FBI for 50 years. He looked firsthand at the 60s and 70s chaos that civil rights movement made in the America and the Vietnam protests, and he saw a direct assault on American traditional values. Hoover's weapon in this fight was the secret program of the FBI called COINTELPRO.
COINTELPRO was a massive government criminal operation directed against the population that went through 4 administrations.
Counterintelligence program. From 1956 to 1971, this legally murky operation targeted a huge number of Americans. And the tactics they used in that operation were very dirty. Wiretaps, opening mail, paid informants, and psychological warfare. All designed to neutralize influential voices in the music and literature and artists. So the FBI was not actively investigating only crimes. They were actively pursuing the ways to silence dissent. And in that pursuit, musicians were top priority. The FBI kept thick files on musicians like folk singer Pete Seeger and Phil Ochs, and also on, for example, Aretha Franklin, soul icon as she was. So why would FBI go to all these lengths to do all that? Because Hoover, he understood the power of music. He knew that politicians' speech can be forgotten in few days, but a good song can become a powerful anthem for a whole generation. So in FBI eyes, the influential rock artist was not just a rock star with a massive following. It was not just an entertainer. It was a political weapon. And in the 1970s, there were just a few bands maybe more influential than Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd didn't start just shouting political slogans on the stage from nowhere. I mean, they started on the London musical scene as a psychedelic rock band. But their sound became bigger and more influential, so the audiences became bigger. In 1973, when they issued Dark Side of the Moon, they became planetary popular rock band. So it wasn't just about selling records, it was cultural saturation in a way that their music was not just playing on the radio. It was played in the dorm rooms, it was played at the parties, and it was in the ears of millions of young people. They were creating deep philosophical albums that made the young generation listen the whole album from start to finish, a concept album, and that way that made them think about themselves, about the world is surrounding them, and of course the society. And for the agencies like FBI or British counterpart MI5 or Special Branch, that was not very good. They were concerned with the band's ability to capture attention of younger people for such a long period of time. And with the albums in 1970s, the musical style became darker and more critical. So in the government's eyes, they became a threat that could not be ignored. The file on Pink Floyd was something very realistically possible. For example, there's a book by the author named Carl Dallas called Pink Floyd, Bricks in the Wall. The book connects Syd Barrett's mental decline to the government's research into mind control using drugs. This research, which was conducted by MI5 and CIA, was mentioned in the book as a possible factor in band's early development and Syd Barrett's departure. That book is not typical band's biography, so you might be interested maybe to take a look at it. It shows some interesting angles into especially earlier years of Pink Floyd. For example, attaching Animals album to punk movement in UK at the time. For what might have sparked interest of MI5 or FBI, and to taking a closer look to Pink Floyd and its influence, you don't need to go very far. Just take a look at the Roger Waters lyrics on Us and Them, as he writes, cynically, "Forward, he cried from the rear, and the front rank died." This is really brutal description of the way generals are mercilessly sending young men to war to die on front lines. On the Final Cut album in 1983, the song The Fletcher Memorial Home depicts imaginary retirement home for incurable tyrants, specifically calling out leaders like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And since the government was deep in unpopular war at the time, it was really serious anti-war propaganda that they just couldn't think it's nothing. Another very obvious attack on the government and establishment is the 1977 Animals, which really attacks capitalism as it is. The pigs which are portrayed there are hypocritical, power-hungry rulers. The dogs are cutthroat businessmen, and the sheep, of course, are mindless masses which just follow what put in front of them. That famous image of the inflated pig flying over Battersea Power Station in London became this iconic symbol of defiance against establishment. The message it sent was very clear. The whole system is rigged and meant to help only the few selected at the top. And this leads us to the most prominent, most significant part of this possible accusation of secret services against Pink Floyd, and that will be their magnum opus, The Wall. The most famous song from the album, Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, was the one that hit #1 across the globe and became a protest anthem for school children everywhere. We don't need education, we don't need mind control. That was a direct hit on conformity and state-run education, which was a pillar of establishment. The album, of course, carried even larger themes than that, but this was the essence of message of rebellion, which was loud and clear and deeply alarming to every agency that was supposed to keep everything in order for the establishment. This story is not just about history. This urge from different secret services to keep an eye on influential voices, it never goes away. In recent years, Roger Waters was very prominent in public and controversial political statements on global conflicts, and it has earned him a new kind of condemnation and political backlash. Powerful people on the side of the government and business will always be threatened by the powerful voices that could challenge them.
After fame, spectacle, and controversy, Pink Floyd began to look inward, not toward crowds, not toward headlines, but toward the listener. They left messages in their music about isolation, about power, about the cost of modern life. Most people heard the Psalms. Very few heard the warning. This is how Pink Floyd tried to tell the world something important, and how almost everyone missed it.
The clocks explode. Not tick, explode. It's 30 seconds of pure sonic assault. Alarms blaring, echoes ricocheting, metal grinding on metal. And then, after a tense, percussive heartbeat, David Gilmour's voice lands like a personal verdict, ticking away the moments that make up a dull day. You've heard it 100 times, right? Nodded along, maybe even mouthed the words.
It has some kind of universal appeal in that it confronts a number of major psychological and emotional concerns.
But right here, right now, I want you to ask yourself one uncomfortable question. What if this song isn't just about time at all? What if it's actually about you missing your entire life while you were busy waiting for it to finally start?
I was 29 years old before I suddenly realized that this was life and it was happening, and this was not a preparation for something.
Roger Waters penned these lines at 28, an age when rock stars are supposed to be utterly indestructible, soaring high on youth and fame. Yet he was already haunted by the creeping sensation that his life had been quietly pickpocketed, one lazy afternoon at a time, right from under his nose. We nod along because the melody is gorgeous, the guitars sing, and the groove feels like late-night incense and wine. But underneath that velvet is a razor. The song isn't reminding you that time flies. It's accusing you of letting it fly while you waited for permission to begin.
We were all turning into adults, really. I mean, gradually, all of us at different rates. We were all changing.
It's a subtle, almost insidious critique woven into a track that sounds so deceptively beautiful. Before recording The Dark Side of the Moon, engineer Alan Parsons was experimenting with quadraphonic sound, an early version of surround audio. For his test, he wandered into an antique store and a clock shop, microphone in hand, recording each clock one by one as they struck the hour. He wasn't thinking about Pink Floyd at all. These recordings were just meant to demonstrate the new technology. But when Parsons brought the tapes into Abbey Road Studios, the band immediately heard something more. Instead of a simple sound experiment, they recognized a powerful symbol, the chaotic, mechanical passing of time. So, they took these recordings and placed them at the very start of Time. In the finished mix, the effect was stunning. Every clock chimed at once, creating an overwhelming wall of sound. And in the quadraphonic version, each clock rang from a different speaker, surrounding the listener completely, as if time itself was closing in from every direction. That was no accident. It was the perfect setup for a song about life slipping by, unnoticed, until suddenly it's too late. The message is primal, unmistakable. Wake up or die asleep. Nick Mason's drums don't swing, they chase. Each tom fill feels like a calendar page being ripped out in real time, accelerating the inevitable. By the time the first verse arrives, your nervous system is already vibrating at the band's frantic frequency. You haven't heard a chord progression yet. But somehow, you're already guilty. You feel the weight of unspoken deadlines and forgotten ambitions pressing down on you. The song opens with its central accusation, cloaked in mundane imagery, ticking away the moments that make up a dull day. It doesn't start with a bang, but a tick, the sound of life being measured out in unremarkable units. This isn't about epic adventures, it's about the slow, unnoticed erosion of your life through sheer, boring routine. Waters then sharpens the point, fritter and waste the hours in an offhand way. The word offhand is key. It implies a casual, careless dismissal. You aren't just wasting time, you're doing it without a second thought, as if your supply is infinite. It's a crime of negligence, committed against your own future. Next, the setting is established, kicking around on a piece of ground in your hometown. This line paints a picture of aimlessness, of being stuck in a familiar, comfortable rut. The piece of ground is your comfort zone, that place you never leave because you're waiting for someone or something to show you the way. It's a brutal takedown of passive living. Then comes the lie we tell ourselves, sung with a dreamy, deceptive calm by Richard Wright. You are young and life is long, and there is time to kill today. This is the core delusion of youth, the belief in an endless bank account of tomorrows. The phrase time to kill is repurposed here as a fatal mistake. You think you're killing time, but in reality, time is killing you, one murdered hour at a time. And then the trap snaps shut, and then one day you find 10 years have got behind you. 10. Not 2, not 3. 10. That's enough time to earn a degree, master a new language, or raise a child. The number is precise and clinical, because vagueness would let you off the hook. It's the gut punch realization that while you were waiting, life was happening without you. The verse ends with a devastating indictment. No one told you when to run. You missed the starting gun. This isn't an excuse. It's an accusation. You waited for a clear signal, for permission, for a formal invitation to start your life. But life is not a formal track meet. The gun fired the moment you were born, and you've been standing at the starting line ever since. At roughly 2:50, the vocals stop, and Gilmour steps forward, letting his guitar speak volumes. But this is no triumphant victory lap solo. It's a wounded animal dragging itself across the fretboard, a guttural cry of anguish. Listen closely to the bends. They don't resolve into sweetness or easy harmony. They hang, they choke, they search desperately for an exit that never quite appears. The solo mirrors that all too familiar panic attack you get at 2 a.m. when you realize the gap between today and your dreams has become a chasm. It's grief without a funeral, a raw, aching sorrow for all the potential-filled years that died quietly in the hum of routine. After the scream of the solo, the chase begins. And you run to catch up with the sun, but it's sinking. The imagery is frantic. You've finally woken up, but it's too late in the day. Now you're not living. You're just desperately trying to make up for lost time, forever chasing a sun that is setting on your ambitions. You're racing around to come up behind you again. A perfect metaphor for a life spent playing catch-up with yourself. The physics of aging are laid bare. The sun is the same in a relative way, but you're older, shorter of breath, and one day closer to death. The world doesn't change, but your ability to navigate it does. This line is a cold, scientific observation. Time's passage is an objective fact, and its physical consequences, aging, fatigue, mortality, are inescapable. It's the universe reminding you that the rules apply to everyone, especially you. The second verse shifts to Richard Wright's dreamy, almost conversational voice, describing the outcome of this wasted time. Plans that either come to naught or half a page of scribbled lines. That half page is perhaps the cruelest detail of all. You didn't even fail gloriously. You just left things half-written, half-said, half-lived. The lyric sticks because it's so small, so relatable. It's the forgotten notebook you abandoned, the project that lost its steam, the life left unfinished. Suddenly, the pronoun changes. Hanging on in quiet desperation is the English way, sounds like a detached anthropological observation. But in that moment, Waters turns the mirror on himself. He's not pointing a finger from a lofty, untouchable pedestal. He's waist-deep in the very same quicksand, struggling right alongside us. That inclusion is what keeps the song from being a sermon. It's a confession, a shared lament that binds us all in this universal human experience. The final vocal refrain is a reprise of Breathe. Home, home again. I like to be here when I can. But after the panic of time, this return to comfort feels less like a relief and more like a surrender, a retreat back to the very hometown inertia the song warned against. The instruments then don't end so much as they evaporate. You're left with the chilling final thought. The time is gone, the song is over. Thought I'd something more to say. It's the ultimate epitaph for a life of unrealized potential. If this is hitting close to home, if you feel that familiar pang of recognition, then that's precisely the idea. Smash-thirsty channels tell you to like and subscribe every 30 seconds. I'm going to ask for something much simpler, much more profound. Take a moment. Look at the last 10-year chunk of your life. Honestly, did you choose it, or did you just survive it? Drop a comment below with one single thing you absolutely refuse to leave as a half-page of scribbled lines this year. Writing it publicly raises the stakes, doesn't it? It's much harder to duck the starting gun when strangers are watching, holding you accountable. Waters isn't peddling despair here. He's handing you a powerful flashlight in a dark tunnel. Awareness, that sudden, jarring realization, is the only exit ramp. The song ends, but you're still breathing, still here, and that means the race isn't over. It simply stopped waiting for you. The antidote to quiet desperation is loud, unapologetic intention. Not tomorrow, not next New Year's Day. Now, right now, while the echo of those clocks is still rattling your ribs. Pink Floyd didn't write Time to soundtrack your study session. They slipped a live grenade into your headphones and hoped you'd feel the fuse burning. For 50 years, we've largely treated it as mere ambiance. Enough. Let the alarms mean something. Let the solo ache with the weight of years lost. Let that half-page of scribbled lines scare you, truly scare you, into finishing the book, launching the business, or finally living the life you keep telling yourself you'll start once the timing is perfect. The timing was never the problem. Waiting was. The gun already fired. Run.